how do you see Osage changing as the community that generated Osage people are continuing to change?
Oh, okay. Well, I see something that started about 50 years ago, a resurgence of Native pride that came around in the 60s and 70s. And so even though we didn't realize at that point it was the Osage culture that kind of we were working on retaining, sharing, learning with our younger people. And then it was kind of one of those things that everybody spoke English and kind of forgot about the language. And so, unfortunately, in 2000, we woke up with 12 speakers. But if you see, you know, in 2003, that the language department was established with the tribe, and that today there's probably 600 people that within the tribe itself, not including scholars, that have taken their time to learn the language while learning the culture, and have made that commitment. As the director of the language department says, we're the last train out. So if you don't get on that train, then it will be lost, and the language will be dead. And so he kind of put that on the Osage people, that it's really not the language department that's going to save the language. It's going to be them. It's going to be their desire to learn and their desire to keep it going, and which is really a very creative way to put that back on the Osage people themselves.
Mervat?
As I said, that I am not afraid that the Arabic language will die, because, as I said, when I see Somalis communities now starting after-school program to teach their kids Arabic, people from all over the world who migrated here, they care about the language and keep it. Even if their children doesn't know how to speak it, they teach them how to read it and write it, because of implementing that in the religion, because they have to pray in Arabic language and read the Quran in Arabic language. For most of the other nationalities, I see them caring about teaching the Arabic language for the spiritual reason more than just daily conversation.
Do you see an American Arabic starting to emerge? I mean, are there new dialects that are being formed as Arab speakers come to this country and have to kind of adapt to a different environment?
It depends on what kind of nationalities you're dealing with. Yani, for example, here in Kansas City, there's a lot of Palestinian, and dealing with them a lot, we picked a lot of their slang word that my Egyptian slang is not there anymore. When I go back, they said, you have an accent, and that accent comes from dealing with Palestinian, for example. Iraqi, their slang is not very common. We don't understand it. Moroccan, the same thing. I see it depends on the group that you will be dealing with, and you will pick their dialect.
Bill, you were talking this morning about all the different varieties of German. What's the state of the German language in Kansas today? Do we still see that kind of diversity within the language?
This is a $64,000 question. Would you actually repeat the question that you have up there?
Sure, but do whatever you want to do with the question. How do you see these respective languages changing as the communities that speak them continue to evolve?
Yeah, maybe if we just focus on change. All of these groups, even the Osage, I think we can count them as immigrants to Kansas at some point, since they came from the Ohio River Valley. brought a certain culture and linguistic repertoire with them. Once they've gotten to Kansas, they have encountered other cultures, other languages, and when two cultures come together, there's almost by necessity some interaction and intermingling. We usually talk about borrowing of vocabulary, but sometimes even grammatical aspects are borrowed. Mervat talked about the Arabic, some person called it the occupation of Spain, but anyway, the Arabic Empire in the Iberian Peninsula and how that influenced the Spanish language through borrowing. You've talked about how English has influenced the Spanish in southwestern Kansas, and I'm sure the same is true for the Osage, borrowing from other Native American languages, or even, you said sometimes they have to create new words based on their interaction with the English-speaking culture. So yes, there's going to be change. I don't think any of these languages are static, except sometimes the Quranic Arabic would be somewhat similar to the use of Latin in the Catholic Church, where there's a ritual language that's, in a sense, frozen in time, although even that can change from time to time because human beings are dealing with it. And those kinds of languages have the ability to last for centuries. I mean, good grief, look at the Catholic Church, look at Islam. And they're not going to disappear, but the day-to-day spoken languages are always changing. And will the next generation speak the language of their parents on a fluent basis? I think that's the biggest question. Unless there's something in the community that keeps the subsequent generations in the language community and they don't get out into the greater English-speaking culture, they're destined to change rapidly, I think.
Well, before we go on to Hector, are you a pessimist on the future of German?
I am the greatest optimist. Do you want me to give my speech away tonight?
No, we'll stop there.
But I'll just say this. If you had asked me 30 years ago, would there be a major new German variety with children speaking that language being introduced to Kansas by thousands of people, I would have probably said no. But here today in 2012, I have to say there is. I think we have to be ready for surprises. Just because we have immigrants from Somalia and Syria, Lebanon, wherever we have them from, it doesn't mean in 20 years we're going to have them from, pick a country. You know, I don't know, Kyrgyzstan, anything can happen.
Hector, would you like to elaborate a little on changes within Spanish?
Yeah, I think this is what happened after you sitting with the knowledge of Bill here. But in a generation for Spanish speakers, I think as long as they keep having babies in the Hispanic community,
God bless you.
but not really. I think is what I'm going to elaborate something about what Bill just said. Is as long as the communities keep helping those newcomers into the community and welcome and be able to see a win-win situation between you are bringing new culture, new language, and I'm learning a new culture, a new language, that will be enough to keep the language moving. It is a win-win situation for both.
Bill?
Yeah.
Could you all pull the microphones a little closer to you?
Could I elaborate on
Sure.
what
Sure.
Hector elaborated
Sure.
on what I said? If I see two possibilities, either continued in-migration or, from outside, from Arabic-speaking countries to the Arabic community in Kansas, from Spanish-speaking populations to the Spanish-speaking community in Kansas, or for that matter, Mennonites speaking Low German. Those as long as there's, I hate to use the word fresh blood, but those communities will continue to prosper linguistically. The other solution is social isolation. And the Old Order Amish are a classic example of that, where they keep to themselves. They don't let the modern world intrude on their community. They don't have access to electricity from outside. They can have generators, but they don't let the lines come into the house. They don't have telephone lines. They don't travel by automobile. As long as you have that rural isolation, sure, you can keep going. As long as you don't die out, as long as you keep having babies.
The next question, and again, we don't have to limit ourselves to this structure, asks about the major challenges that new people who are arriving in Kansas face today. What's different about immigration to Kansas now from what it's been in the past? And I was trying to think of answers to that question today as I was listening to your different presentations, and it seems to me, and this is just a starting point, that when we're talking about the Osages and the Germans, primarily why they came to Kansas was for land, which was really the main source of wealth in the 19th century. And when I'm hearing the stories of Latino and Hispanic immigration and Arab-speaking immigration to the state in the last century or in the last decade even, it's not so much for land but for jobs. And I'm just wondering how that has changed things in terms of how you see this intersection between language and culture. I mean, has immigration itself changed just through this history? Ed, want to give that a shot?
Yeah, I like to. Well, in terms of a worldview, like Jim said, that Osages, Germans were coming here for land. I don't think that that's any different than, say, Hispanics or Arabs coming here for jobs, because what did that land mean? In the 18th and 19th century, it was life, place to hunt, farm, things like that. And so that was about survival. Now in the 20th century, the majority of us aren't growing our own food. We're not hunting. We're not doing those things. So I don't see it all that different. It's the underlying theme in all of it is economics. The Osages, we came this way at whatever point people do, because one, the Iroquois people were interfering with our lifestyle, so we moved further west, initially doing it to somebody else. But then it became many have referred to what we had here as an empire, because we were so much a part of that early fur trade. And to keep the supply to meet the demand for European furs and what they needed them for, we extended our hunting base and things like that. But it was to get trade goods, things of that nature. And so I think the reasons that we've all come to Kansas is basically the same. Terms of survival might have changed and what that means, whether it's a land base or whether we need money or jobs, as we've become kind of job focused in this country, where everybody doesn't do anything. We are taught to do one thing well, and that's what we work at. And then, so I don't see much of a difference. Immigration-wise, of course, we obviously had different immigration policies back then. We were a little more relaxed in ours. And we can see the error of those things now. But nonetheless, I think that survival, coming here to survive, that is a good place to be. Kansas offers a lot, especially this area. environmentally speaking, Kansas has a lot to offer in this part of the state. There are a lot of different environments out here that offer plenty of food, both flora and fauna, and so it's a good place to live, and that's in human nature. That's why people go to some place. They can survive there. It's easier.
I think for the people who migrated from any Arab country to here, just for having opportunity for education and for job and for security, living in a peace place, because we all know what's going on back there. For anybody who leave their country to come in a new area, that means they are looking for better life and better opportunity to live in peace.
Bill or Hector?
I agree totally with Ed and Mervat. I always wondered who to compare the French to, but now it's the Iroquois. Thanks.
I would like to add a little bit challenge for new immigrants, especially the Hispanic population or Spanish speakers. I think I want to put it this way. Their challenge will be our limitations to become a better community and society. If we don't understand their challenge and we don't know their challenge, those are going to be our limitations to keep moving forward and having a better community. Understanding that, knowing that, then we're going to break those barriers, we're going to break those challenges, and we're going to move together to a better place of living. And like Ed said, the land was for survival. Most of the Spanish speakers migrating to the Southwest Kansas or any place, it is for better life. It's for better living, for more education for the children, because they want to have a better life and better life for their children as well. Then continue to be the centralized living.
Before we go on to the next question, I want to make sure that anyone in the audience who wants to ask a question of the panelists or maybe has some insight into immigration to the state or other languages in the state that we didn't cover today, because believe me, these four barely begin to explore it. I just want to open it up to anyone in the audience who might have a question or a comment. So. Yeah, Shannon. And speak loud, please. So.
My voice is back. I know that the new immigration laws are, going to be taking, effect. I just want to hear, what kind of feedback, what your thoughts are, just in general, anything about, what you think of the new immigration laws, what your hopes are to, for more social justice in particular. Just anybody.
Are you talking about the deferral action about immigration law for those children or those younger population that came to the United States before the 16 years old of age?
Yeah, just any of it.
And, I think it is a very, very good way of saying the socialization and make them aware that they've been here not because they decided to move into the United States. Their parents decided to move, and they were part of their family. Especially in a Hispanic population, Hispanic families, the families are really close together. And there is sometimes that they left behind their children in their own countries, but when they bring them to United States and they're 2 months, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, then they didn't have a choice to stay or not. then I think this new immigration law will help them, and looking into from another perspective, from education, it will help raise the education in the United States, because it's going to open the doors for those that they didn't have access to education because of the legally permanent residence in the United States. Not that they're going to have a way to be a permanent resident, probably in the future, hopefully, but just to be legal citizen, that they could be out of the dark. When I say out of the dark, it is, we know the numbers, and we have some statistics of Spanish population in the southwest of Kansas, but we know the numbers from a census. We don't count those that they don't want to be counted. Then I believe this is being a great opportunity for those young people, and I hope they could be more elaborated in the future. Again, I think the challenges are coming when we know our limitations, and one of our limitations is if we don't understand that these kids are being working somewhere, but they're working. They need to live. They need to bring food to their families, even if they're here for 30 years. They need to work. Now, paying taxes, I don't see how they get away with not paying taxes, even if they're legal or not. They pay taxes. Everybody pays taxes. Even when you go to the grocery store and you buy some groceries, you're paying taxes. Then I don't see how they're not paying taxes.
Zachary?
Yeah.
Loud, please.
Dr. Keel, I unfortunately was not able to attend your session earlier, but I wanted to ask, where are the largest concentration of German-speaking people in Kansas?
Well, there's two areas that I would immediately point to. The general area around Ellis County, where there's a large concentration of Germans from Russia, Volga Germans, and even Bukovina Germans. The Southwest, Liberal, Garden City, Dodge City, that area, the rural counties where there's a large number of Mennonites from Chihuahua, Mexico, that speak a Low German dialect. And there's still a few people in Marshall and Nemaha County that speak a Low German dialect. And I have to mention, again, the several communities of older Amish where they continue to use their Pennsylvania Dutch as their daily communication. So there are several areas still where we can find a good number of people.
Okay. And then just a second question that I had. Obviously second to the majority spoken Spanish in Kansas, probably second to English. Sounds like, you know, the Osage population numbers are still growing, but still small. Would you say between...
Are you talking to me or to Ed?
Just the panel in general.
Oh.
Would you say between Arabic and German, which one is more spoken in Kansas?
According to the statistics?
Yeah, so a ranking of all four by how much they are in Kansas, their presence. So Spanish, and then would you say that?
After English, Spanish, definitely, then German.
Okay.
And Arabic would be third in that group.
Thank you very much.
Come to the lecture tonight. I've got the numbers.
Jacob? Thanks for coming forward. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, this is a general question for the panel in general. Something that Hector said regarding equal access for immigrants and just, cultures, different cultures respectively. It kind of got me thinking, what defines a culture? I know that's a really broad topic, but specifically, what things would need to happen in order to be recognized as a culture and to get equal access? Like, for example, in the history of the U.S., certain Indian tribes, many Indian tribes were discriminated against for various reasons, because of skin color, because of cultural practice, whatever. Same with Spanish, same with German, Irish, it's happened. But I was specifically wondering, Olathe, which is close to here in Kansas, has a very strong deaf population. What would maybe the deaf community or the deaf culture, as some call it, what would they need to do in order to get recognized as a culture? Or what would need to happen in regards to getting equal access, such as in schools, equal access to education, job opportunities, and such? I know that's a broad topic, but any commentary would be appreciated.
Which brave soul is going to start with that?
I'm sorry.
Let me pull out my anthropology class here. The deaf have a culture. I mean, they communicate differently than we do. They see things differently than we do because of their communication style. So as far as that being recognized, I hate to say that I think it is recognized in most part. What I see as the biggest issue is their communication style, because not everyone knows how to communicate with them. That's the biggest challenge. It would be very similar for most folks, like Hector coming to the United States and being sent to that conference that he talked about, and not speaking English, and not one person at the conference spoke Spanish. And so I very much believe that they have their own culture, because there is a different worldview there. There is a different language. I mean, it's called sign language for a reason. And so, and there's different languages. I mean, American Indian people had sign language. Then we used here American Sign Language, but as I understand, that language also changes across the world. So, and I'll be honest, my experience with deaf people is very limited. I don't know American Sign Language, and I barely know Indian Sign Language. But we often use that on the plains to communicate with each other, because maybe we couldn't speak to a Pawnee or somebody like that, which we wouldn't anyway. But if we stumbled upon a group, I mean, it was usually a bad thing. But sometimes those exchanges were civil, and they were done in sign language, because that was the same across the board. Those hand signs is how we refer to them, were the same. And unfortunately, it just takes awareness for the rest of us to catch up, honestly, to be able to learn that language, to be able to communicate with those folks.
Anyone else at the panel want to jump on this question?
Yes, I wanted to just make a couple of comments on the integration and how to develop the culture. I think we really don't have the right answer, but I like to say, in my experience with the newcomers to the Southwest Kansas Somalis, they have different traditions in their own culture, and they are trying to develop ways to continue with their culture, but adopting the American way of living. Then that's our opportunity to go there and teach them how the American way, without living their own culture, because we can be more rich in cultures when we learn how they are practicing their culture. And I'm going to put this as an example. And I'm going to bring Tyson again because it is our main mid-plan. Females in the culture of Somalis, they don't touch themselves when they go to use the restroom. They don't use paper. They use water. They need to have bidets. We don't have bidets in the schools. We don't have bidets on Tyson. We don't even probably, well, we probably know what it is, but we don't have that. That's a new culture. But is that the culture that we need to learn to adopt to their, or they should adopt to our culture? That's the question. Then if we adopt a simple and easy bidet, then we accommodate that culture to be contribute to a society and be part of our society. And we learn that there is people with some other cultures around us. Then I think emerging one culture to be part of the community, it is in effect when we are learning from that culture.
I think what will help also is when we have new group, try to learn some of their culture, because that makes them feel comfortable that we are not trying to change them, but we are trying to learn more about them. And this way they can share without being afraid, are we going to be dissolved living here? And there is a lot of small culture, but when we share and practice, we learn from one another. For that example about the Somali, there is a lot of little things that it can help us to increase our knowledge by learning more about the other culture. That helps them to feel more comfort and helping us to increase our knowledge at the same time. Sharing the culture and also having some activities to bring people to see how the culture can be practiced anywhere. You don't have to be on your homeland to practice your culture.
I want to add something else, just to closing on the equal access or equal opportunities for those different cultures. We did a practice in the Adult Learning Center. We create a calendar for holidays, and holidays for every single culture or ethnicity that was present in the center. Then some months is all festivities because everybody wants to celebrate their own. But that it will have the opportunity for everybody to say, oh, I'm different and you're different, but they're here together. And then in the middle, it is the 4th of July. Oh, but we all celebrate this. Then sharing a calendar of cultural holidays, it will show everybody that everybody has similarities, but they came together in some points.
Doesn't it seem in a lot of ways that language is a signifier of what your primary community is? So if you're born into a Spanish-speaking or an Osage-speaking or a German-speaking ethnic group, that's going to link you to that language for a while. But in the case of, coming back to Jacob's question, in the case of ASL, you're born to parents who are probably not deaf. That is a physical condition, not an ethnic group. So there is a deaf community, and consequently a language and a culture, but it's not one that's linked necessarily by biology, by family or kinship. And so it just seems to me there's a whole different set of dynamics when you're talking about ASL as opposed to these others. It certainly deserves its place in all of this to be addressed and studied, but it also seems very unique. Does that seem to square with what you've experienced?
Yes, definitely. As far as American Sign Language goes and the deaf community, what's interesting is that they don't have necessarily lineage. It's very rare to have deaf mother and father, and then deaf child, then deaf child. It's rare unless there's maybe a genetic disease or something like that. But what happens a lot of times is like 90 to 95% of deaf children are born to hearing families, and then they're sent to be schooled in a separate institution, deaf institution, or sometimes they're mainstreamed. And just the reason why I was asking it, what defines a culture, was, I mean, there's definitely some like huge leaps that happen with, as far as the deaf community being recognized as an official language, as an official culture. But there still is a debate going on as far as legislative, just saying, should they have equal rights such as, you know, any other ethnic group, or should it be recognized as a disability? I know that I'm kind of getting off topic, but really it's something that I kind of approached Mr. Leiker about and just said, you know, what exactly defines a culture? And once a group is recognized as a culture, I think it's a little easier to gain equal rights and equal access instead of just being a group that believes a certain thing. If they're recognized as a culture, it kind of makes the game a little bit more serious. But thank you very much. Your answers were spot on.
Any other questions or comments from the audience? I'll ask the final question here, and this will probably take a while. A young person graduating from college now will likely still be working in the year 2050. The way my retirement plan is going, I'll probably still be working in the year 2050. But by then, Kansas, like the rest of the country, will be a more diverse place with regard to ethnicity. Especially since Tuesday night, there's been a lot of additional talk about the changing demographics of the country, what role, what impact that will have on politics, on economics. A lot of pundits now are saying, of course, that the United States has rounded a corner. We're something very different now. So talking about Kansas specifically, assuming that a young person starting out today, graduating from college, is going to stay here, what advice would you have for them, for somebody that's going to be still working in the year 2050? I mean, how should they prepare for a more diverse world or country or state? Understand they can't all learn 5 or 6 languages, although I guess they could. But.
Well, that was going to be my opening comment, Jim, so thanks a lot. But seriously, in my experiences in Europe and stuff, Americans are very lacking. We're very behind on that fact because we tend to have that well, why doesn't everybody just learn English? And that probably comes from our colonial roots. To do that, because I mean, that speaking as American Indian, that's what it was to us, was why don't you, you know, you're going to go to this boarding school and you're forbidden to speak your language, so you must learn English. So unfortunately, we were raised with that and put that on others as a part of colonialism. But you know, in the old days, in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, even Native people spoke several languages. They needed it for commerce. They traded with other tribes, other peoples. Many of them would learn to speak French, learn to speak English to trade. It was part of business. And essentially that's what we need to get around that and get over that, because there are many Spanish-speaking peoples in the United States, and that language is growing worldwide, so it would behoove us to follow suit. And it doesn't mean that you stop speaking English, but you're going to need, when I moved to Kansas, I was like, man, I should have took Spanish as well, because there's all kinds of job opportunities for bilingual, you know, folks, and so it opens doors. So to know another language, whether it's Spanish or German, Arabic, that's one of the big issues with Native people today, with the young people, is nobody speaks our language, so why should we learn it? That's one of the questions that all the youth ask. And then you have a person like me that is self-taught and doesn't realize how much they know until they get around somebody else who speaks Osage. I experienced that a year ago, but still for 5 years I studied Osage on my own, and that's more for me. I guess kind of like Arabic, it's more of a religious sense for me that this is the way that I was maybe not necessarily meant to speak to other Osages or other people, but it was the way I was meant to speak to God. And so for me, there's a spiritual side to it, that this is how I need to pray and how I can be best understood by our Creator.
I think you nailed it, actually.
Okay.
Mervat?
I think my advice will be for any student now is take the opportunity of learning other language because it opened the door for you. Never stop learning. Knowledge can get you higher. Never settle with what you know. To be happy in any place you go and understand the people where you're going to deal with and be safe by learning the language of these people.
Bill or Hector?
You said or Hector, right? How many years is that now? 50, 40 years?
38.
Oh, just 38? Okay, thanks. Well, based on what we've heard today, I would say we need to be learning Chinese.
In Spanish?
And
Oh,
Arabic.
don't, listen, Spanish is not a foreign language.
Yeah.
That's number one.
Yeah.
And
Arabic is a foreign language.
I was going to, you've convinced me, right to left. I mean, God knows we should know Arabic.
That's right.
Absolutely.
It's a wonderful language.
I'm a friend of all languages. I wouldn't deny that. But yeah, Arabic, Chinese, Spanish. That's my answer, and in no particular order. And I agree with what they've said, too.
Okay. I think I agree what the three of them said then. But in preparation for the next generation, I believe it is to find a common ground between the person speaking English or the person speaking some other language, then find common ground. And kind of like the example that I was saying about the line on Tyson. Everybody speaks Spanish. They don't know English, but in the middle of them, there's Somali, Burmese, Vietnamese, and all the common ground is Spanish. Then all speak Spanish. Then find a common ground first. Second, open mind. Be open mind to different ways of talking, to different ways of languages, and get involved. Get involved with that person that speaks a different languages. How do you learn that? Or can you teach me just to say hi, or how are you, or welcome, or the easy words? In one of the research, I was one time in an airplane, I took one of the magazines there, and I read a little bit of research that if you expose your children's between 0 to 5 years old to different language, and then they expose to that language in their older years, they will learn that language easier. Then let's start now. If our next generations are gonna start having kids, then if they being exposed to different languages, then it's gonna be easier for them to pick up those languages in the older years.
Slash proposal, but as far as the general advice of just learning different languages, I agree that definitely is probably the way to go. But knowing I'm Jewish, and so as part of my custom to learn Hebrew, and then also all through high school, and I've taken college Spanish courses, I can vouch for how difficult it is to learn another language when it's not a necessity, such as someone immigrating into this country. And so for business reasons and political reasons, would it maybe, especially in 2050, where there's already software which kind of translate languages for you, would it maybe not be more beneficial to study international affairs and the customs and cultures of certain countries? Because those won't change, but like knowing, for instance, the handshake versus other things.
But I think that's, I think Mervat, I believe you've stressed this enough, that the language is the key to the culture when you get right down to it. And you can do a lot of superficial things like that, but unless you really make put yourself in the other person's language, so to speak. I hate to use walking in somebody's moccasins or something like that, but it's really true. You've got to be able to transport yourself into the other culture via the language, or perhaps via ASL, to really get into their personality, what it's all about. It's otherwise you're just scratching the surface, I'm afraid. And by the way, I hope my statistics are correct, but what is the third most prevalent language in Johnson County after English and Spanish? Exactly, Chinese. So I just wanted to elaborate on what I said, those three words, Spanish, Arabic, and Chinese.
I think Zachary's raising a good practical concern that learning another language is really hard work, and you have to be really truly motivated to do it. But I'm also hearing from the panelists in that it's not just simply a matter of finding words that translate into new vocabulary. Each language conveys a different worldview, certain concepts, certain ways of looking at God and the universe and each other that is unique to that worldview, and it's unless you're immersed in that language, you cannot really understand another person's mindset.
Do you know the title of Benjamin Whorf's book? It's like Language and Culture, or Language, Thought, and Culture. You may not agree with everything. It's W-H-O-R-F, Benjamin Whorf. But this book is, gosh, about 60 years old, I guess, that the language shapes your worldview, how you view anything from snow, time, past, present. What is past? What is present in these various languages? They all see the world a little bit differently, and that's what's exciting, is to get out of your own personality and into that other culture. It's hard work, but darn it, that shouldn't scare us off.
Gary.
Well, I just wanted to add that for me, technology is very, as translators and so forth, they're very black and white. It's this or that. And language is gray, and it's living, and it's moving and changing all the time. And maybe in 2050, it will have caught up, but I don't know. I think there's so many other parts too.
I'm pessimistic about that.
About what?
About technology being able to really replicate human language.
Yes.
Yeah.
I understand that.
I'm pessimistic on that one, Jim.
Okay.
I got that down. Thanks. Okay. I think Mervat was trying to contribute here as well.
Well, I want to say that technology is not going to help us to increase our social life. We now, yes, we're having everything by computer, but that is breaking the unity in the family. That is really putting the social life behind. You can sit with children and they cannot start a subject because all their hand on the computer is saying, give me your attention for a second. But learning the language, it's really having a lot of advantage as a human being, learning from each other, feeling toward each other. Computer and translating word to word, it doesn't give you much but white and black, that's it. But learning the language, you learn a lot of other skills along with the language, beside the culture, beside the ideas. There is a lot of benefits of learning language. We cannot just replacing learning language by calculator or computer or technology.
Yeah, and often those translators don't have a literal meaning to them. They might say, this is hello, but it means more than that. Maybe it's asking how it is with you, or things of that nature. Rosetta Stone is really actually real notorious for doing that. And so it's the language without the culture, which is really weird when you think about it, because that's the expression.
But so just to finalize, I know it shouldn't be the language without the culture, but you don't believe that you can get the culture without the language, so to speak, you know, through, because, so for like for me, when I went through my Hebrew education, there was two parts. It was, you know, Jewish education, Israeli education, as far as like all different facets of society, you know, the politics, the economics, you know, the currency, the, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then there was the religious sense. So would it, nothing else, obviously maybe the language would be ideal, excuse me, but, you know, it would take much less time to maybe just learn the general customs and precepts. Do you think that could still equally be as important or beneficial?
Not equally.
Okay.
You're going to get more out of it because there are certain things that we struggle every day to define, and certain cultural aspects in everyone's culture are part of that. There's a certain thoughts, certain ideas that aren't translatable, honestly, that they stay in there, which, you know, for those, folks that study the Bible and things like that, there's always that issue of multiple translations. And so that was interesting when you said the Quran is Arabic, doesn't go anywhere, it doesn't change. And so it's really interesting. You know, it always made me wonder, as far as Christianity, what did that Bible actually say? And not the literal translation, but everything behind it. So you can get some culture, absolutely, without learning the language. There are some norms that I believe you could maybe not acquire, but you could definitely mimic. Enough to get you by, but definitely because that language is also your lens into that culture, how things are spoken. There's certain ways that certain languages, certain people set up their sentence structure. Osage and quite a few other native languages, we don't speak like English. Our subjects, our verbs are in different places within that sentence, so you couldn't translate word for word what something says and make much sense as you could kind of getting that, here's the idea, here's the general idea of what this person's trying to say.
Yes, ma'am.
That 0 to 5 year, Chomsky said there's certain things that you don't hear it within the first, some people are saying now within the first 2 months. The sound is lost by that. So you can never be a native speaker. So it's real important if you're going to expose, if you want your children to learn the language that you can talk, you need to be working on this, but you need to hear it real early, and that first 5 years is real.
Bill, is it Hanson's law that talks about the 3 generations of immigrants that come to the U.S.?
that's you are talking about in terms of assimilation?
Right, right.
That's a standard kind of rule, but I don't buy it. It might be true in urban areas, but it really depends on the whole situation, especially in the rural communities.
Well, what made me think about that is the question of why grandmothers are so upset when their grandchildren can't answer them back in their own language. And I think what's emerging from this conversation is that those grandchildren, if they don't know that language, cannot really understand their values, their worldview, their religion, their spirituality, perhaps. And so there's this feeling of disconnect. And the way I was taught that concept is that when immigrants come to the U.S., they sort of cling to that original tongue for a while, but then their children will rush to assimilate, become English-speaking, and kind of see parents' language and ways as backward. But then it'll be a later generation, grandchildren or great-grandchildren perhaps, who will try to go back and rediscover through genealogy that original language that was lost. And I'm just wondering how applicable that is in the case of Kansas. Clearly, Bill, you don't think it works at all because, or maybe it works partially.
It works, but I don't think it necessarily goes over 3 generations. It could take longer, but the process is essentially correct. It's just a question of time, and in some cases it can be more than 3 generations, and in others it can even occur in the 2nd generation. So, but it's okay as a little rule of thumb. Just don't assume it's God's truth, that's all. Right.
I think everything depends on how serious the parents are using the language and teaching the kids. If they are serious about it and putting some effort, it takes a lot of time to insist of teaching the language and encouraging them to speak the language, and maybe going back for vacation to spend a month or 2 back home where they have to speak it and use the language. It takes a lot of effort, but it pays off on the long run. It's really rewarding to see that you brought them here and they don't get lost and losing the original language. It helps a lot also to have grandparents and relatives or dealing with families who cares about keeping the language going. You have to do your homework, and in the end you will be rewarded that the language didn't disappear by the time.
That was one common thread I think I heard in all your presentations today, is the role of elders, whether it's grandparents or simply the seniors in a community, that they have a role to play in keeping that language, that subculture alive.
Yeah, a very simple example I always use, I've been teaching at that language from preschool all the way to universities. I always insist, even 3-4 years old, when I ask, how are you? I want them to be able to tell me, Alhamdulillah. I don't accept fine, good. I said, look to your face how you say fine. Your frown, good, your frown. But when you say Alhamdulillah, this way I make it interesting for them that it is something that you enjoy. You don't force it, but find a way to make it interesting, because if you force it, they will lose it sooner or later. But be happy to teach them and show them the advantage on the long run. How does it help them on the long run?
And Bill?
Yeah, I just would emphasize that for survival, in any language has to have communicative functions. And it could be a ritual function, as in a religious observance of something like the Arabic in the Quran, the classic Arabic, or Latin in the Catholic Church. I've already mentioned that. It could even be the function of a grandmother refusing to answer if the child doesn't speak in the language that the grandmother wants to speak. I mean, that's a communicative function that would trigger a response in the child. Of course, the child might leave, but I mean, you have to have something. A language has to have a purpose. Otherwise, it's going to wither.
Hector?
I just want to comment on attaching the language and the culture again and the generations. And just want to use an example of, living example with my twins. They're emerged in a cultural, in American culture, not a Hispanic or Mexican culture. They speak Spanish, but their way of acting, the way of doing things day by day is the American way, not the Mexican way. When we have some relatives coming to our house, cousins, then they was using Spanish, but some words in Spanish, they have double meaning. And they were, the cousins were joking, and they weren't even catch that. Then it is related to culture, and it is related, but they don't have that type of culture that they bring when they have, when they're bringing directly from Mexico. They have a totally different atmosphere of the language. Then the best way, if you have or you can be immersed in a community where everybody speaks the same language and you can do and buy and live in that language for a period of time, that will be the best. Now, she mentioned going for a couple of months of vacations or something. It could be vacations here with your own community members. If everybody speak that, then make some part of that just to continue that language and the cultural, because it is, every language has different types of doing things.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious if one of the reasons that we're learning different languages is promoting cultural understanding and the idea that even though we all have different cultures and religions and whatnot, we all have more in common than we do different. What do you say to proponents of like a universal language? I mean, do you think that's a good idea, or do you think we should keep everything separate and maintain, or both, or what are your thoughts on that?
I want to start, and I won't say, I think that's a very open mind, and I'm not opposed to something like that. It will be a rich language for everybody and be universal. However, I think going back to the cultural and enrichment for each one of those numbers of languages around the world, it will be magnificent if we learn more and more languages and cultures around the world.
I think by nature, we don't like to have one thing. We like variety. Imagine if today we only ate one food, or if we look outside and all the trees looks exactly the same. By nature, as a human being, we like varieties. When we have different language and different culture, we learn more, we enjoy it more. And being here for 38 years, I'm sure I learned a lot and I enjoyed more than just being in Egypt eating Egyptian food. I learned all different kind of food. I met all different kind of people. And I think that make us rich and make us enjoy our life more than if we have one thing. Because by nature, we cannot only look to this white all the time. We like different color, and that make us appreciate being here.
Any other questions or comments? I think we're winding down here, but any other thoughts? Oh, Zachary, yes.
Yeah, I'll raise my hand. This is my last question, but not to seem like a patriot, but isn't English considered the universal language? So we do technically. No?
No.
Well, not universal, but I thought it was considered something like the language of commerce.
I've heard it described that way. The language of capitalism, perhaps, is more appropriate. But I don't know. That is a good question. And
way to end on a happy note there.
Yeah. Does Chinese have a better claim to becoming the universal language if we're going to have one?
There's not one variety of English.
That's right.
So if you look at the English that you might hear when you call your credit card company, and the person is in India that's responding to you, that's a very different variety of English than we speak here in Kansas. So, yeah.
Or Mississippi English, yeah.
That's an interesting thing in its own right. But you're right, there's an international use of English in business.
Yes, ma'am.
Earlier we ranked the languages in order from most spoken. I think we listed the top 4. It was Chinese, English, and Spanish.
Oh, in the world?
Yes, and I forget what the fourth one was. Was that
Arabic.
Arabic at that point? What would happen if, so that's ranking it in number of people speaking it. What would happen if we changed that ranking to one of number of countries in which it is an official language? How would that change the ranking?
Kind of an electoral college of sorts that we're.
What?
Sorry to make you do that off the cuff.
That's a good question. I'm not sure we know the answer.
Yeah, gosh, I don't know. We'd still be last.
We don't know the number 1, but we know who the last one would be. And
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, we'd pick up Namibia, but
Okay,
that's
there is-
not-
Ma'am.
Sorry, Sarah, one of the students. I'm actually an anthropology major at UMKC, and we had just discussed this. As far as demographically speaking, Arabic, I think, comes in 8, but that's also looking at, you have countries like Jordan that fit in the state of Massachusetts. So if you're looking geographically, I think, and that's another reason why we think English is the universal language, because if we look at, as far as English as an empire, and anthropologically speaking, it is an empire, English would probably be number 1. But as far as pure population, and we also not only have immigration, but we have emigration, which is the exit. It's the opposite of immigration. It's spelled with an E, of people out of a certain area. Certainly with refugees, we see, like, that's where we get a lot of the Somali population, the Iraqi population within Kansas. So even going back with this question, you could see you could definitely see a mass exodus of people. You could see a mass entrance of people from various other countries. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think German's still in the top 5 for sure, and Spanish is I think like 5th, if I remember correctly.
I'm especially interested in it because I study French, and just given their colonial past in Africa, they have colonized a lot of smaller countries, and so those countries have, many of them have just recently in the 60s gained their independence. So French is actually one of their official languages of government and business in those countries, and in that case, French, I think it's ranked in the top 5 in that case. But if we speak in terms of people speaking it, it's further down in the list of the top 10. It's not even in the top 5 or not. And I was just wondering what the number 2 language would be, because English, I believe can we agree that that's number 1?
In terms of number of countries that have it as an official language.
You also have to imagine after English, with China having, 2-point-something billion people, there's only upper 6 billion people in the world. So you have to imagine that Chinese is most likely the number 2.
But that's just one.
Right,
How many
but
countries
it's-
have that as its official?
I think Bill's point here is also a good one, that what is Chinese, what is English, what is German. As we were discussing at lunch, a lot of the words, the nouns we give to these languages came out of the 19th century with the development of the nation state. And then, for example, in Bismarck's Germany, you have this attempt to try to create a homogeneous German language where perhaps there never was one before and nobody cared to have one. So I think your question really goes to the connection between politics, national politics, and language building. States build languages. We've heard a lot of evidence today that languages are organic, but at the same time, in a lot of ways, they are artificial constructions that you can't completely separate them from the national state system. Yeah. Are there any other last questions or comments, either from the audience or the panel? Shannon, you get to ask the last one today.
Letzte Frage.
Okay, so just from what I've heard from this entire exchange, and this is for anybody in the panel, based on your experiences, what policy changes in our public school system here in Kansas have you felt, just through, over time, and, you said to yourself, gosh, I wish this would happen, or gosh darn it, I wish they would do this in the public schools. What do you, and any of you, would like to see happen in educating our young people? Like you said, 0 to 5 is the absorbent time for children, the easiest time to learn. Maybe even based on examples from other countries, other states here, for example, in Japan, they're very accommodating. I remember when I was a young woman, I was with my friend in Japan, we went to Disneyland, and we got separated. In 2 or 3 minutes, they immediately found somebody that spoke English, and they were like, well, of course I stuck out with a sore thumb as well, but they immediately got me reunited with my friends. And so I'm just wondering, what can happen here in Kansas that can improve because I know that the American mindset is gosh darn it, you come here, you better, just kind of fit right in, or do something, do whatever you can to fit in. But maybe what attitudes or whatnot can be changed and improved in that to make it more accommodating, and especially since we are becoming more diverse.
I think it will be really nice to have all the holidays of different language added in the calendar. And I see that already done in Blue Valley. They add the 2 feasts for the Muslims, and also in Shawnee Mission. And if it become a holiday, this way everybody share the feeling and the happiness for those holidays, and that will bring everybody together, that they know more about each other culture instead of just isolating themselves in occasion that they don't like to participate in.
It's a good practical suggestion. Yeah. Anyone else on the panel? To Shannon's point?
I think our kids ought to have earlier exposure to other languages within the school system. When I was in Germany, they were learning English in elementary school. It wasn't something that, when you got to 6th or 7th grade, then you got to pick. It was something that they learned early on, and you could tell the little kids spoke better English than we spoke German. And so I saw a big difference there.
One thing that I did when my kids were in elementary school, because how is the kids feel, oh, Mom, you're different. I said, no, I'm not different, I'm unique. Then, okay, can you drop us here instead of dropping us in front? Then I will park the car and go and volunteer twice a week to teach Arabic in their class. This way I know what's going on there. But I think it is good to get involved and be exposed where people can reach you and ask a question instead of just saying, okay, let's just hide and please the kids. You know better than the kids.
Did you want to ask a follow-up, Shannon? Yeah, Carrie, you get the last word, actually. So.
Well, I would like to pull in, I teach Spanish here at the college, and one of the things that people say is, oh, well, it's so hard, and Spanish is supposed to be one of the easier languages to learn if you're an English speaker. But what I tell my students is that if you want languages in the schools and in the preschools and in Head Start and those really young ages, the people that you vote onto the school board, you have complete control of that. So you vote those people in. the people on your school board. Secondly, if you make language an issue, it becomes an issue. So let the people on your school boards know that you want language at a young age in your schools, in your local schools. It's within our control. It's not something big and nebulous out there, in my opinion.
Well, I want to thank everyone in the audience for their questions and comments. They are setting up for another event at 5 o'clock, so I'm a little sensitive about having us adjourn on time. I want to remind everyone that Dr. Keel will be speaking tonight at 7 o'clock in the Hudson Auditorium upstairs at the Nerman Museum. And let me get the title right. The Crazy Quilt of Languages in Kansas, Weaving the Cultural Fabric of America's Heartland. I think there will be some material there that is new, despite everything we've heard today. I want to thank my co-director, Vince Miller, who had this idea about 2 years ago and has been working carefully with me to develop this. So Vince, stand up and take a bow. I certainly want to thank the technicians who worked with us today with all of the technology. Certainly I want to thank our 4 speakers, Ed Smith.
We learned a lot from you today.
Mervat Ibrahim.
Thank you.
Dr. Bill Keel. And Hector Martinez. And even though they're not here in the room, the cameras are rolling, so we'll get it documented. I want to thank the catering staff for the terrific layouts that they provided for us today. When I told them what this was, and I said, how about some diverse food to go along with our languages, they didn't bat an eye. They had exactly the right idea. So round of applause for the food service today. Once again, thank everybody for coming, and hope we'll see you this evening.